The French Revolution began in 1789 as a reaction to the taxation of the poor and middle classes, while the clergy and aristocracy of France paid no income tax whatsoever. Louis XVI, France's king, hailed from the Bourbon family, which had a long history of pushing France's involvement in a great number of costly wars, from the 7 Years' War to the American Revolution. Seeing as the nobles did not fund these wars, that responsibility fell to the poor and created a massive nationwide famine when peasants could no longer afford to eat. Having just witnessed the American Revolution against rule by the British, French thinkers known as philosophes theorized that Enlightenment ideals used by the Americans, such as liberty from oppressive government, equality under law, and brotherhood of citizens without regard to class, could also be used as the main ideas of a revolution in France. These principles would later be simplified as liberté, égalité, et fraternité, which remains to this day the motto of France. The French Revolution began on July 14, 1789, when the Bastille prison was stormed by a mob of insurgents in search of arms for an uprising. Revolutionaries were led by the ideals of two men in particular, Maximilien Robespierre and Louis-Antoine de Saint-Just, sometimes known respectively as the Incorruptible and the Angel of Death. However, upon the victory of the revolutionaries in 1792, when they succeeded in the overthrow of the king and the establishment of the First French Republic, the thoughts of these men quickly dwindled from democratic idealism into authoritarian paranoia. Robespierre is most infamous for his descent from the man who stated, "The secret of freedom lies in educating people, whereas the secret of tyranny is in keeping them ignorant," to the man who began the Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror, sometimes known simply as the Terror, was a year-long period of mass executions in which the political party of Robespierre and Saint-Just, the Jacobins, beheaded French citizens for any perceived slight against the new order of politics, society, and law. The monarchy itself was the first group to be executed, but average citizens who aligned themselves with the monarchy, known as monarchists, soon followed in the range of around 10,000 executions during the Terror. Some citizens were executed for such minor offenses as simply owning a deck of cards which contained a king. Live from NPR News in Washington, my name is Andrew Lusk. You're listening to Historical Figuration at the top of the hour. Joining us today in studio are two pivotal figures in the Reign of Terror, Maximilien Robespierre and the severed head of Marie Antoinette, and one not-so-pivotal figure, the brother of artist Jacques-Louis David, Louis-Jacques David. We'd like to welcome all three of them to the studio and get straight to business with our questions. We'll begin with you, Monsieur David. Thank you for coming on our show today.
Thank you for having me. It's the closest I've ever gotten to fame.
Yes, well, your brother wasn't available, so we had to settle.
That's what my wife says, too.
Let's move on. According to your newly released autobiography,
It sold 3 copies in its first week. That's 3 more than my publicist had expected.
That's very sad, monsieur, but let's stay on track. According to your autobiography, you survived the heat of battle during the Paris Commune uprising in 1792. Would you care to elaborate a bit?
Absolutely. In 1792, on the way to one of my brother's art exhibitions, I was led on an unintended detour and ended up on the wrong side of the Seine. Upon reaching the wrong side of the river, I stumbled upon the Hôtel de Ville and decided to step inside the bar adjacent to it for a drink. After all, seeing the majesty of my brother's artworks, whilst I cannot draw a simple stick figure, calls for only the strongest of spirits as remedy.
I see.
As I was enjoying my drink, I noticed a queer sound from beyond the walls of the bar. I stepped outside to see what was the cause of the commotion, only to find that Georges Danton and his ideological comrades were charging towards the Hôtel de Ville, intent on capturing for Jacobin control. Sorry, Jacobin. Sometimes I cannot pronounce things correctly. As the Hôtel de Ville was the house of the government. Shocked by this, I continued to drink. That was all.
Do you happen to know if the attempt was successful?
Yes, it was. The French government then came under full control of the Jacobin party, and the Reign of Terror ensued shortly thereafter.
What was it like to live through the Reign of Terror as a common citizen, holding no military rank or possessing any formidable wealth?
Frightening, as any man, woman, or child could be sent to the humane guillotine for his or her supposed treason. I knew a man of 20 who had been executed simply for implying, upon seeing the carriage of a nobleman pass him by, that he was impressed by its splendor.
Would you say that, had it not been for the widespread executions, the revolution would have been successful?
I hold a view contrary to that of my brother when I suggest that the revolution was not successful at all, regardless of any string of executions or otherwise. I find that, since the revolution fed immediately into the establishment of the position of emperor, which then led into another system of monarchical rule for over half a century, the revolution itself cannot be attributed as a success in many ways other than with regard to mere symbolism.
An interesting stance. Thank you for your time, Monsieur David.
Of course.
We'd like to welcome you back to Historical Figuration. As stated earlier, we had planned to interview the severed head of Marie Antoinette and Maximilien Robespierre, but as it turns out, they are no longer available. NPR has been informed that both were removed from positions of being able to speak about their experiences under a new gag rule implemented by Emperor Bonaparte. How any of this makes sense is beyond our understanding, and we'd like to apologize. This is NPR. The first executions of the Terror were targeted exclusively at the monarchy, beginning with the wife of the already deceased King Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette was voted unanimously guilty of treason by a court of revolutionaries. After her beheading, countless members of the aristocracy and the noble elite were executed publicly in Paris, and the executions became somewhat of a spectator event among citizens. Soon after the nobility came members of the Roman Catholic clergy who refused to acknowledge the new laws of secularism imposed by the Committee of Public Safety, a Jacobin stronghold. The Jacobin Party, the political party of Robespierre and Saint-Just, was notorious for its streak of violent left-wing radicalism, which eventually led to the party's demise upon the execution of Robespierre and the subsequent conclusion of the Terror. Following the executions of certain members of the clergy, the attention of the Jacobins turned to the opposing political party, the Girondins, who were generally more conservative and in favor of a constitutional monarchy rather than a full republic. It is estimated that anywhere between 2,000 and 5,000 Girondins and their suspected supporters were executed via the guillotine during the Terror. Once this phase of the Terror had ended, the Jacobins had become so fearful of political dissent that they began calling for the executions of their allies, such as the working-class sans-culottes revolutionaries, common citizens who voiced neither support nor opposition to the revolution, and even more moderate members of the Jacobin Party itself. The Terror came to an end when a majority of the remaining Jacobins sought to have Robespierre executed and succeeded on July 28, 1794. Special thanks go to History.com and the United States Library of Congress for both the pictures obtained for this presentation and the information. Thank you.